Well, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending upon where you are in the world, and welcome to today's DevOps.com webinar. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, moderator for today's event, and I welcome you. As always, we have a great webinar on tap, but before we get started, we do have a few housekeeping items we need to go over. First of all, today's event is being recorded, so if you miss any or all of the event, you will have the opportunity to listen to it later on demand. Following today's webinar, we'll be sending out an email that contains a link to access the webinar. And we are taking questions from the audience. So if at any time during today's presentation you have a question for our speaker, please don't wait, don't hesitate, just use your GoToWebinar control panel and submit your questions. And we'll take a few minutes near the end of today's webinar and go through those audience questions. And also at the end of today's webinar, we will be doing a drawing for 3 $50 Amazon gift cards. So please stick around. Hopefully you'll be one of our 3 lucky winners. All right, with that, we're going to go ahead and kick off today's webinar, which is an anxious ops guide to nailing Black Friday. What a great topic. I'm so excited about this one. But I am going to turn it over right now to Peter Salidas, who is going to introduce our speaker. So Peter, take it away.
Hi, everyone. Great to meet you all. Thank you all for joining. Yeah, as Charlene mentioned, I work in brand marketing at CATCHPOINT'S, so I'll just be introducing NIF and then introducing some intro statistics and trends of Black Friday, just to set the scene for today's webinar. So great. I'd love to introduce today's speaker, Nithyanand Mehta. We call him Nith at CATCHPOINT. He's the VP of Technical Services at CATCHPOINT, but also we call him Black Friday Monitoring Expert. So Nith leads CATCHPOINT India and our global technical services team that includes professional services, sales engineers, and support. Nith has 10 years in the monitoring industry and over 15 years in the internet technology space. He specializes in helping organizations implement digital end user monitoring strategies and enhancing end user experiences. And I've included some of these e-commerce logos below because Nith also manages a program called Black Friday Assurance here at CATCHPOINT, but he's been guiding some of these companies along their monitoring journeys and essentially guiding them through their monitoring strategies before Black Friday. So, we like to say that Nith, works for all of our customers as well, and he's an extension of their ops team. So that's where his majority of his experience lies. So great. So today's agenda. So first, I'm just going to take you through some quick stats and trends from the past few Black Fridays, and then I'm going to hand off to Nith to show you kind of what to look out for during Black Friday. What are some of the primary causes of outages and trip ups for operations today and over the past few years? Then Nith is he's gonna ease your minds and give you a step-by-step guide to preparing for any sort of uncontrollable or surprising outages during that Black Friday Cyber Week shopping period. And then I'm going to hand it back off to Charlene to run the Q&A at the end of the webinar. Great. And so, we've been looking at, pouring over some statistics of the past few Black Fridays, and there's a very, very common trend. There is a rise of digital. It's year after year we're seeing growth in digital, and that culminated last year in Cyber Monday achieving the largest single sales day in U.S. history of 7.9 billion. I believe Amazon Prime Day may have eclipsed that, but at that time in 2018, that was the largest sales day. And also with that, the total for that 3-day period in sales is 17.8 billion, and that actually accounted for 8% of total sales from some of the top e-commerce companies. And when we break out that 3-day period and compare it to an average 3-day period for the top e-commerce companies, the sales during Cyber Week were 973% higher than typical, which is fairly astounding. And when you break that down even further, we just took some examples, and we're on the eve of Prime Day, so we wanted to take a look at some of the numbers there. Amazon did $1.6 million per minute in revenue and $97 million per hour in revenue during Prime Day last year alone. And yes, Amazon is an anomaly for how big they are in the e-commerce space, but you see in the chart right from our friends from Gremlin, there's a breakdown of other traditional retailers out there also have a sizable chunk of revenue per second. And when you multiply that figure, 973% higher than average sales period during Cyber Week. And we can understand why in the world we're doing this webinar, in July. It is a big day. It represents a high percentage of typical e-commerce revenue per year. So it's important to start as early as possible. And so as we see this rise in online growth year after year, 22, 51, 24%, we're also seeing a leveling off of in-store growth. In the past couple of years, we've actually seen a decline of in-store revenue on Black Friday during holiday shopping season. And so what we're seeing is this shift in traffic. And so it's almost at a 50-50 split of the ways between online and in-store that consumers are doing their holiday shopping. And so the perception of what Black Friday chaos is, it's no longer the waiting in lines, that congestion at the in-store and folks fighting over TVs, which I'm sure still happens. But that congestion now, the perception of chaos is clicks and traffic and congestion to network tubes and online and the internet. And so there's some other trends that we're keeping an eye out, and it's relevant to our customers, the operations teams and SRE teams, is now Black Friday isn't just Black Friday, Cyber Monday, and Thanksgiving. There are companies now doing pre-Thanksgiving deals. Major retailers like Walmart, JCPenney, and Amazon are actually starting their Black Friday deals the Sunday before, and there was a cumulative $2.4 billion in revenue the Wednesday before Thanksgiving. And so for everybody on the line, to make sure that you're aligned with your company strategy, as you understand when those deals are coming out, because last year, some of the companies were not ready for it, and if there was a few pretty sizable outages and glitches the day before Thanksgiving. So some other trends that we're seeing, keep an eye on, there is just a surge in smartphone and tablet usage. As you see some of those stats there, 40% of the online sales and 59% of the total traffic during the holiday season were done from a smartphone or tablet. And then you're going to continue to see this buy online, click and collect, pick up in store, they call it BOPIS trend, which accounts for over 30% of overall online sales, which is something to keep an eye on your omni-channel strategy as customers are continuing to buy more online and actually pick up in stores. And as this mobile trend continues to rise, you have to make sure that you're keeping an eye on who that mobile user is. They are increasingly impatient and unforgiving on these platforms. So the expectations of users, as you've heard over and over again, are getting higher and higher and higher. So the margin of error is less on this during these 3-day periods. And also you see just simple delays in performance can lead to drop in conversions. And when we're looking at the type of revenue figures that I showed you previously, those can be sizable losses in revenue if there's a slowdown on this day or during that week. And then a lot of the delivery of your site is out of your control. And we've seen in the past month, if you're keeping an eye on some of these internet outages, with Cloudflare and the Verizon BGP leak, Google Cloud going down, and then Facebook, we see with third-party pixels, there's a lot of third-party vendors, infrastructure vendors that you're relying on that could go down and impact your site too. So, Nith will take you through how to keep an eye out for those later on in the webinar. And what's at stake? You have lost sales, public media backlash. You see the TechCrunch and New York Times are reporting on some of these things, which eventually goes up to the higher ups of the organization. And then you have this customer service mayhem, tickets and complaints, and dealing with all that backlash when there is an outage. So there is a lot at stake. And so that whole culmination comes to the reason why we call this an anxious ops guide to nailing Black Friday is because there is a lot of anxiety. This is a really important traffic period. But don't have no fear. We have Nith here to explain to you how to better prepare and if there is an outage, how to quickly respond to that. So I'm going to pass it off to Nith to talk about some of the trends in traffic, and then what some preparation steps that you can do to mitigate some of these risks. So are we showing this screen right now? There we go.
Thank you so much, Peter. Thank you everyone for joining. Can you see my screen?
We can see it.
Okay, fantastic. All right, so Black Friday, obviously we spoke about what's in stake. But the very first thing that comes to mind talking about this mega shopping events is the surge in traffic. In 2018, there was about a 300% spike in the traffic than what websites typically used to get before Black Friday, which means more conversion, about 60%, and the trend is pretty similar. 65% on mobile and desktop was about 35%, right? So we're seeing a steady trend year after year with the surge in the traffic coming from mobile and desktop. Desktop still receives in terms of conversions and so on. But talking about traffic, right? We are at a digital era where most of the infrastructure and the delivery chain is third parties, right? Whether it is cloud, whether it is CDN, DNS providers, integrating with platforms, analytics, whatnot. About 80% of applications are usually third party, right? So there's a lot of emphasis on third party, and so they also have to be well prepared. So all those applications that you control, you also have to work with third party to ensure that they are well prepared for this big event. And the reason I talk about that is some of the common third-party applications that companies use, like tag management, which can be seen and pretty much in almost every single website, whether it is GTM or TLM and Adobe and so on. What you see here is on any given day, the shade that you see here today as we speak is the number of customers that they have. But during Black Friday or Cyber Monday, it almost multiplies by 3x, which means all those thousands of websites that have, or sometimes millions of websites that have these applications in place, they have to ensure that these third parties are well prepared, like analytics or payment gateway. In fact, last year, IBM core metrics went down exactly on the day of Black Friday. I think we do have one of the slides. We'll talk about it later, but core metric goes down, it's analytics. It shouldn't impact the application's performance, provided companies have the best practices in place, right? So this is probably one of the most important thing that a company should worry about is, what are the third party applications that you use? If they go down, how is it going to impact your application? Websites that have some of the modern best practices in place to ensure that these third-party content did not block the loading or rendering of the content did not get impacted that much. But all those who have some of these contents right at the top of the page and not abiding by some of these best practices were severely impacted when core metrics went down last year, right? So the biggest takeaway here is, if your e-commerce website traffic is going to increase by 3x or 300%, your partners or the vendors that you use are probably going to increase a lot more than that. And we've got to ensure that they're well prepared, have a playbook, and so on. We'll talk about that in detail. So these are third-party integrations and applications that you have. But here's another, probably one of the most important ones that we should be well prepared for, which is CDNs, because almost every single application today that we talk about, e-commerce sites or ads, or everybody leverages one or more CDNs, right? And Peter spoke about the recent outages that Facebook was down because their private CDN had a problem. Cloudflare was down last week, and there was a Google Cloud problem as well, right? What if any of those incidents happened on a Black Friday, right? So it's really important that we also understand the performance of these CDNs at that given point of time. How much are they going to be able to scale, and also ensure that we have clarity around what happens when there is a problem. What is your failover plan? Like LinkedIn had a problem yesterday where with one of the CDNs, which had some trouble with the redirect logic, they failed over to another CDN almost instantly. So all those who were browsing LinkedIn did see a problem, but did not last too long because they had a backup plan, right? So it's so important to ensure that you have a backup plan, but also have a clear process in place by working with your CDN vendors, because they are going to see several thousand folds of increase in the traffic that they handle. Right. So we spoke about them, but I think I think to set the stage, let's take a look at some of the common Black Friday outages that we've seen across hundreds of websites that we monitor and that we work with. Right. And the reason why we're talking about this is this should serve as a good best practice, because these are some of the areas that you want to watch out for. Right. And we've basically put them in those 4 different categories, which also serves as the pillars of monitoring end users, right? So reachability, availability, performance, and reliability. Now, there was a problem with CenturyLink last year at around at the time of Black Friday on the East Coast. So all those were using CloudFront, and a few others were having trouble. So CloudFront was rerouting it from East Coast to a certain different location. So there was a severe latency, right? So we worked with some of our customers in detecting the problem, worked with CDN, ensure that they have the failover plans, right? So when there is a 300% increase in traffic on a given day, peering issues, congestion is common. And also, this is the time of the year when all the hackers are really active, which means the DDoS and all other kinds of network congestion attacks are going to be at its peak. So peering and congestion problems is one thing to watch out for. So you really want to ensure that you have visibility into your end users being able to reach your application. The next most important one is availability, right? You need to have redundancy in your DNS. Some of the things that we've seen is a connection timeouts, especially when the traffic peaks. If you're not well prepared for handling that amount of traffic, there's a lot of connections waiting in the queue, eventually timing out or sessions being reset. A DNS and timeouts are probably 2 important ones you should watch out for. And then, of course, a site going down with 400 errors, redirect failures. Redirects are pretty common, especially in some critical parts of your application, like search and payment gateways and so on. And companies typically, to avoid or reduce the latency, leverage cloudlets or other services provided by certain CDNs. And like I said, one of the problems that LinkedIn faced yesterday was one of their redirect logic was broken, right? So you want to be able to detect these problems, but ensure that you're monitoring each of these. But the ones that really impacted availability of companies on Black Friday was third parties going down. Core metrics went down, and then there was border-free a third-party service which also went down last Black Friday, right? And when these go up, if they're not really as implemented as per the best practices, they can impact the origin website, which means users will see latencies, timeouts, blank pages, and so on. So you really want to ensure that third parties don't pull down your website. And another most important one is critical transaction failures. And what this means is the purpose of an e-commerce site is users should be able to buy, search, go through all the critical user journey, like adding to cart and eventually checking out. And we had a pretty popular website which is into audio systems and so on. One of their add to cart button for the most popular site was missing during Black Friday, right? That's not something that you would want to see on a Black Friday. So you want to ensure that you're tracking all these critical end user journeys. So as soon as there is a problem, you're detecting them. But also, if there is something that randomly happens and there is a pattern, you should be starting to monitor much sooner. Moving to performance, any of those components that we saw in availability can have latency, but the ones that we see frequently are time to first byte. If you have a CDN in place, then your end users might be going to your CDN, who in turn might go back to your origin, right? While the CDN does a lot of the offloading, if it's not cached at the edge, then the request that goes back to your origin should be optimized. So you want to ensure that you have visibility. Latency at the edge on your CDN, those are a couple of things. And again, third party impacting critical rendering path. These are the ones in the red are the most frequent ones that we've seen across the hundreds of websites that we work with or companies that we work with, from one Black Friday to another. These are some of the incidents that repeats year after year. And finally, reliability, right? We've seen applications where it does not go down, but there are intermittent failures that happen at a very high frequency, right? Which means your users are navigating from one page to another and they experience problem, right? Which is not really good for the brand. At the same time, when there are so many websites with so many offers, you want to avoid them, right? Malfunctioning name servers, you probably have not monitored or tested all the different DNS name servers you have. CDN mapping is another really important one, right? Which plays an important role in the reliability and the consistency of your application. You implement a CDN to ensure that you're delivering good end user experience for all your users across all regions. CDN mapping is where, for example, you have a user coming from New York, but the CDN is serving traffic from Dallas or a farther location, which deceives the purpose of your CDN. And this happens on a daily basis, right? So you really have to ensure that your CDN is mapping your end users to the nearest edge server, right? Sometimes this happens because of configuration issues. This happens because of the kind of package that you have with your CDN provider. And there are real issues that happen because of capacity and whatnot. So you should be monitoring this. And finally, undetected slow endpoints or servers behind the load balancer. We've seen this. So you really need to be tracking some of these. So we spoke about the incident. So this is a quick recap of what happened. This was a gap which had a downtime where they had some content on the page which slowed down, created a bottleneck, impacting the end user. This was Snapchat, right? When Snapchat went down, it also brought down a gap, right? So this goes back to the best practice that we spoke about. If you have content which is not under your control, you want to ensure that it's really critical to have it at the top. If it's not, you should have it at the bottom of the page, so it does not impact the user's ability to interact with the application. So this was core metrics. We spoke about this. This was big. The reason why you see all those different colors, those are all the different websites that were impacted, right? Besides the CATCHPOINT customers who utilize CATCHPOINT, CATCHPOINT also keeps a track of the internet health, all those different companies, right? So when core metrics went down, we literally saw hundreds of websites having application problems, latencies, users not being able to interact, and this did last for a few hours, right? This was the infrastructure outage where users originating from AT&T were not able to access an application in Boston. Other ISPs they were, but AT&T specifically they were not, right? So you really need this visibility to check if it's a local ISP problem, so you could reach out to that particular ISP and get it resolved. Traffic spikes, all those red diamonds that you see there are those failures where Lowe's returned 503 for their end users. And it's again because of the surge in traffic, and you want to ensure that you're well optimized to be able to handle this amount of traffic, right? And the reason why we've shown you some of those incidents is because it boils down to how well we are prepared, because there can be so many different kinds of problems in those 4 broad categories that we spoke about: reachability, availability, performance, and reliability, right? And you really need a well-rounded strategy to ensure that you're monitoring and detecting your applications, but most importantly, you're optimizing it and preparing it well before the shopping season, right? Which is precisely the reason why we are having this as a webinar today, 3 months sooner, because a lot of companies have a code freeze in the month of October or second half of October. So all the optimization efforts that you can focus on, this is the time. In fact, a lot of our customers have started doing that from January. Why are we talking about this and why are we doing this is because we work with about 500 plus customers across the world, and some of them listed in front of you right now. And all our practices, not just the product, but also what we do and what we encourage and evangelize, is based on the best practices that we picked from how our customers implement and run their stores and shops day to day, right? So going back, a quick recap around a monitoring strategy, right? So there can be failures happening at any given point. So it's really important that we have all these different aspects covered. You have visibility into the users being able to reach your application. Also, you're able to quickly detect if there is something that's not available, so you know what's happening. Most importantly, latency can kill. So you want to ensure that if there is something that's slowing down your website, you're detecting. And you also want to be able to deliver consistent performance for all your users. Right. But the question is, what and how do you monitor, right? And it all boils down to, so there are so many problems that can happen, but what do we monitor? How do we ensure that we're monitoring all the right things, right? And so to start with, this is what we're going to look at is a sample e-commerce architecture, right? This is a stripped down version of what an e-commerce architecture would look like, but this should serve as a reference so you get the idea of what I'm trying to explain right now, right? So you've got your end users who access your application. The very first thing that they go through is the DNS resolution process, which in turn maps them to the CDN. From the CDN, if it's not cached, it goes back to your origin, firewall, load balancers, and all the entire application stack that you have behind, and you have the integrations with third parties, right? And we spoke about where and the different kinds of reasons why things can go wrong, right? So you need visibility here to detect the reachability problems. You want to ensure that all your users across the US or across the world are able to reach your application. Any point, any problem, you want to be able to quickly detect that. DNS failures, right? So if they're able to reach you, and if your DNS servers are down, or if there is latency or one or two name servers which aren't responding or which aren't optimized, then you want to be able to detect that as soon as there is a problem. What happens after the DNS is resolved, right? So your DNS is mapped to your CDN. So you want to be able to quickly detect any problems related to your CDN. And we spoke about some of those problems, but I've kind of summarized it for you over here, where is there a latency on a particular CDN edge server, right? You're going to expect a lot of traffic coming from San Francisco. Are they optimized to serve traffic from San Francisco's edge server, or is there a latency on that particular edge pop? What about the latency between edge to origin, which is if there is something that's not cached on your edge servers, the requests are going to go back from your CDN to your origin. Is there a latency there? Is there something that's delaying the request? We spoke about mapping. Cache miss, that's another big thing, right? One of the best practices that a lot of companies employ during shopping season is caching as much as possible besides the business logic, right? So caching plays a very important role to help handle large volumes of traffic. And if things break in your caching logic, that can again have a ripple effect on the application performance. So you really want to ensure that you're monitoring the caching, how many cache misses are happening, and you want to be able to quickly detect that so you can work with your CDN and get it rectified. We spoke about the redirect problem that LinkedIn had yesterday, but again, that's another thing which companies use CDN for, right? And that's another visibility in unoptimized contents. A lot of companies focus on optimizing their JavaScripts, their images, style sheets, and so on. But CDNs have the ability of doing this on the fly, on the edge, and you want to ensure that there's nothing breaking over there, right? So you really want to track some of those. So this is until the CDN, and what happens after that? The end users access your application, and the application in turn makes calls to some of your API integrations that you have. We spoke about the payment gateway, address validation, and tax calculation, whatnot, and also other tags for your ads, marketing pixels, analytics, tag management, all the other third-party content that you use. You want to ensure that they are working fine, and if there is a problem, you're detecting it. And most importantly, you want to also ensure that these third parties do not have any bottleneck on your application performance. And finally, origin, right? So you also want to ensure that you have visibility into your origin performance, right? Which is your end users interact with your edge in turn goes back to your origin and fetch the content. So you always want to ensure that you have an eye on what's happening on your application logic. You don't want one of the examples from the previous Black Friday incident was a pretty large e-commerce customer having multiple warehouses. They had a logic where it checks the stock availability real time, and one of the warehouses ran out of stock, but the other warehouse did have stock. But for whatever business logic failure, it said product out of stock when they did have it in stock, right? So now these are kind of problems that you may not think of, but these are problems that can be detected because they impact the user's ability to buy and check out, and ultimately impacts business revenue. And the only way you can detect that is have API tests set up, monitor those critical APIs, monitor those critical end user journeys that they do on your website. So we've looked at the different kinds of problems. We've looked at the 4 broad areas that you have to focus on. We've looked at how to determine, based on your architecture, what are those important things that you focus on. And we introduced this program called Black Friday Assurance so we could help you also through this process, right? So we work with all our customers in helping them, based on the best practices, set up tests which can help them detect these problems, work through a process so they can quickly detect and mitigate problems. And most importantly, we still have 4 months to go for Black Friday and Cyber Monday, or the holiday season. So what could you do to optimize your application? And what can you do post the event to understand what went well, what did not go well, so you could prepare ahead for 2020? So here's how it typically works. We work with our customers based on what we just explained. We understand what their priorities are, what are the challenges that they've been facing based on the data that CatchPoint has captured. If we don't have any historical data, we start now, so we could set up some tests and based on understanding of what's really going wrong, what's happening, and so on. And to quote an example, last year at around this time, exactly in the month of July, there's a pretty big e-commerce company who's again into audio systems and so on, reached out to us where in 2017, they had a major outage. They had a major outage and it lasted for about 5 hours on the Black Friday. And it really impacted their business. They have about 40% of their annual business happens during the holiday season, right? So they wanted to ensure that it does not happen. So we reached out to CatchPoint. We started the monitoring practice and set up tests and so on. But most importantly, we tried to understand what are those things that help them ensure that they safeguard their revenue. What are those critical failures that can have a big impact? So you work backwards in implementing the right tests, identifying what those areas are so they could optimize and monitor it so they're well prepared for before the event. And on the event day, we worked with them. So they have CatchPoint's engineers available if there is an incident to detect a problem 24/7, 365. So they have any problem, they can reach out to the team and get resolved. And once the event concluded, we identified what are those other additional optimizations that they could focus on for the rest of the year in 2019, so they prepare well for 2019 November, right? So that was an example, but this is basically the workflow of what the Black Friday Assurance program looks like, right? And the goal is obviously continuous improvement, define metrics, define goals, define what the challenges are based on your past experience, and how can we address them, right? And we understand the components. We looked at the e-commerce architecture, which is really important because the only way you can detect a problem and what to monitor can be defined when you have a good understanding of how you're delivering the content. What are those components in between? Do you have multiple CDNs? Are you a multi-cloud architecture? What are your partners? What kind of integrations you have? So you have visibility into all those individual components. That's basically where the implementation is. And then once you have the implementation taken care for monitoring, it's about monitoring and detecting problems. And MTTR stands for mean time to repair, which is how soon can you detect a problem and resolve? Because the sooner you resolve, the lesser the impact it has on end users, and most importantly, also on your business. And load times, right? when we know a site is down, we know it's down and it's impacting the business. The one thing that's really difficult for our business to understand is poor performance or volatile performance. Volatile performance that's impacting your 95th percentile or the 75th percentile for your end users. So you really want to understand what are those bottlenecks and optimize your application, right? So those three important phases that this program evolves around: implementation based on a clear understanding, efficiency in detecting problems, and optimization. Right, that starts with, this is probably the most important phase for monitoring. We spoke about the architecture. Do you have the right tests in place? Do you have the right kind of alerts in place, right? So we saw this problem recently where when Facebook was down last week, none of the other monitoring solutions detected the problem because Facebook itself, Facebook itself was up, but the images that load within Facebook were not working, right? So this was last week. And that was because Facebook CDN, which serves or handles images, whether it was Facebook or Instagram or WhatsApp, all of them were down because none of them, all those things that handle the images were down, right? So you really want to ensure that it's not just the right test that you set up to monitor, but you also have the right alerts in place. So you're detecting all those problems and blind spots. Dashboards for visibility, right? So for the team that's going to be around working 24/7, they really need dashboard that makes sense. And of course, finally, reports. So you understand patterns, create use cases, user stories that can be shared with others. So you're always focusing towards the north in terms of optimization. Team augmentation, right? So this is probably a challenge that organizations face, and CATCHPOINT as a neutral vendor plays a pretty good role over here, right? So typically you have an application, there are so many different teams involved. You've got your network ops, you've got SREs, you've got application development teams. Then of course there's business and marketing. Typically you hear business and marketing team complaining about performance impacting revenue, but then you have teams working in silos, and there's a lot of finger pointing that happens, right? So CATCHPOINT is a neutral vendor, as a neutral third party. We provide a data which is from the end user's perspective. So we are able to augment or bring all these teams together on the table, and data speaks the truth. So you have teams working together more efficiently because they know exactly what is impacting the application's problem, whether it is your CDN, DNS, third party, or even the application design, right? Do you have too many JavaScripts on the page? Do you want to combine them? Do you want to strip down things that are not necessary? Right, and we spoke about organization challenges. Is monitoring is as a practice, right? So you can buy a tool, but we don't have the practice and the culture in place. It takes time. It takes time to understand what needs to be optimized and so on. At the same time, businesses are expanding. Companies are going beyond. And the US or Black Friday itself has grown into not just North America. The UK is also pretty big in Black Friday. We see Prime Day, and there is Big Billion Day and other things that happens in India as well. So the concept of Black Friday is really big. Companies are venturing into new markets. So it's really important that you understand what's impacting the end users from all these different locations. Mean time to detect is another important aspect, and how can companies really be able to prevent some of those incidents and mitigate impact, mitigate any of these incidents that occur, right? So you need to have the visibility and the right incident management workflows in place. One of the examples that we spoke about, which is when core metrics went down, one of our customers really had their a tag management team stand by. So they removed core metrics until it was resolved. So on Black Friday, you can't afford to have all those important teams who have the right privileges around. We've seen companies who were not able to get hold of their tag management team to be able to add or remove content from their application when one of their partners or third party goes down. So incident management is also about having that right workflow in place across escalating it to the right team, having all those people around at the right time so you could get those problems resolved, or at least get them removed or block them until these third parties or vendors have rectified. And again, going back to the LinkedIn example that we spoke about yesterday happened. They were able to quickly fail over from one CDN to another, got the problem rectified, and rolled back. All this within a span of 1 hour. What should your NOC teams be monitoring? Do they want to just check latency, and you just be able to reach, or do they want to check other critical components around page load times? So what we basically enable our customers to do is we also have our performance engineers who are on standby, who also have visibility. But the idea behind this practice is we worked with a lot of different customers. We understand what really makes a difference, what kind of signals to look for, what signals indicate a problem in which part of your application. So through this exercise, we are trying to evangelize the practice of having the right test setup, the right metrics are being alerted and tracked, and the right process is followed in terms of triaging and escalation. Because, like I said, performance monitoring is a practice and a culture, and the industry is in the process of learning that and evolving. Shorten outages, again, going back to what we spoke about yesterday, right? Once you have the right visibility, proactive tracking, being able to quickly detect whether it is failover or whatnot. When Cloudflare went down last week, companies had to just wait until Cloudflare brought things back up. All those who had failover options and others were in safe hands. But if you did not, they were at the mercy of these third-party vendors to be able to go back and resolve the problem. So you really need a playbook, but also have a clear plan to roll back. Finally, SLA management. Now, this is an important topic, right? Because you're investing so much in your third parties. You want to know what kind of problems. Typically, if you go back and look at the SLA language of Google Cloud or Google CDN or any other CDN, the SLA language includes what we call as downtime, and you've got to go back to them with either your logs or the data that you have to prove that it impacted your end users. And most importantly, there is a specified time limit within which you can go back and claim SLA credits and so on. Some companies have 30 days and some it's have about a 1 week or 3 days and so on, because based on the huge volume of data, they themselves store logs for not more than 3 days. So you really want to ensure that you have the data when there is a problem. That's basically how you can manage your SLAs with third parties. The common ones, like I mentioned, DNS, CDN, third-party tags, tag management, A/B testing tools, cloud providers, platform providers, and so on. Optimize focuses a lot on the reliability aspect of the 4 pillars that we spoke about. But what do you optimize? Where do you start? Right? Well, an application has thousands of pages. You go to any popular e-commerce website, they probably have hundreds of thousands of pages. But where do you start? We saw the Spotify, Shopify post that Peter spoke at the beginning. Every second impacts the business positively or negatively based on a drop in performance or improvement in performance, right? So if you're going to focus on optimizing your application, the very first thing is where would you start? And the answer to the question, this is a tough question typically, but if you have the right data in place, whether the CatCHPOINT offers real user monitoring, so if you're using real user monitoring, you know what to focus on, but you really need the right data which tells you where to start, and that data should tell you what impacts your business. And typically for an e-commerce, it's your product pages, your category pages, and your top product pages that really makes a difference. And you want to ensure that these page groups, or it could also be the search functionality, that's where you start optimizing, right? And that's because that makes a difference to the application's performance. And then we're talking about performance specifically. Do you want to optimize your whole page? Or the very first thing that typically the industry focuses on is the perceived experience, which is at what point is user able to see contents and being able to interact. So maybe not the entire page. I want to ensure that the users are able to view the content as fast as possible and interact. So you probably are focusing on, there are a number of metrics out there like visually complete or speed index. Reach out to us. We can talk about some other best practices. But it boils down to what metrics makes a difference to business. And there are hundreds of metrics that are available related to performance, but we have to be really surgical here in understanding and picking the right metrics that makes a difference to the business and understanding what impacts user experience. That's a process that companies still have time to do. CatchPoint will be happy to help. We are working with a lot of our customers through this process at this point, but through this program, we are enabling that for other customers to be a part of this. In fact, a lot of this is covered in our blogs as well. Finally, optimization strategies should always evolve not just purely on the performance monitoring data. Synthetic is excellent in detecting problems as soon as possible, so you can get to the root cause of the problem that's impacting an end user and resolve, whereas real user monitoring provides you with all those real user statistics around where your real user is coming from, what kind of problems they're experiencing, what's your sweet spot based on the page performance for better conversion. So it's really important that you have analysts who are correlating performance with what's impacting the business, understand trends, which cities to focus on, and also have these KPI reports available so you're always tracking if you're making progress. So if you make a change, one of the exercises that we did with a major FIS a financial services company last month was we basically did an A/B testing where they had a page which had combined some of the JavaScripts and a page which had inline, and we saw a clear difference. And the purpose of this was they were facing some challenges and users who were using their payment gateway. And we've been tracking this progress every single time there's an effort that is done by their engineering team, and what impact it has on performance and all the other KPIs, which is why we said performance is a culture, and it's not a culture of an individual team, but it spreads across multiple teams. You really want this KPI and reports which can be shared across these different teams. To summarize, performance is a continuous effort. You want to identify what those bottlenecks are, correlate to your business goals. This screenshot that you see here was with Kaspersky, a pretty popular security solutions website, and we've been closely working with them, and not just optimizing their application, but also in adopting new technologies from a they were on a multi-page application on a traditional setup. We helped them move to a single-page application, optimize, and it's an ongoing process. So that's pretty much around how you can well prepare yourself for Black Friday. Start early, identify what really makes a difference to your business, ensure you have the right monitoring strategy in place, start your monitoring, implementing your monitoring practice sooner, because at the end of the day, all your internal monitoring systems may say you're green, but if your end users are not able to interact with your application, it makes no difference. So you want to ensure you're capturing all those end user or metrics, and you have the visibility so you can proactively detect and resolve problems. Peter?
Excellent. Yeah, I think Charlene, were you going to be doing the Q&A, or do you want me to kick that off?
I'll be more than happy to jump in here and get the Q&A rolling. Just a reminder to the audience, if you have a question, please go ahead and use your GoToWebinar control panel and submit it. We have about, I would say about 5 to 7 minutes or so for questions. So we'll go ahead and dive right on in. First question. Let's see, you talked about failover. So when do you know when you need to fail over? And how do you avoid overreacting to non-issues?
Absolutely. Right, so the very first problem is failover is not, gone are the days where companies do failover manually. failover is an automatic process. There are solutions out there which helps you track when there is a problem. So you could failover from, for example, let's say one CDN to another. Companies deploy this using DNS services or other real user monitoring based services, which enables you to failover automatically. So it's not really a manual effort. And this is done based on criteria that you define based on your monitoring data. For very first thing, what kind of problem are you facing? Is it a problem with your CDN? If yes, what kind of problem it is, right? So it's purely based on your monitoring data and you being able to detect the problem as soon as possible, and then configuring logics in these tools, which allows you to fail over from one provider to another.
Excellent.
But
Okay.
at the least, if you're not using multiple providers, say you're not using multiple CDNs, and if you're using, if there is a major outage like the BGP leak that happened on the 24th of June, which impacted multiple providers, or the one that happened on the 2nd of July, at the least you should be able to fail over to your origin if your CDN is facing a problem, or vice versa.
Excellent. Okay, great. Next question. How can you identify bottlenecks on your site?
Sure, that's a good question, right? Bottlenecks is anything that blocks a page from loading the content that it's supposed to load, or the critical components on the page. So browsers have a mechanism where they can download X number of requests in parallel at any given point of time. So if there is a request that is blocking the active session of a browser, we call that as a bottleneck. And typically these are JavaScripts, these are client-side rendering content, these are third-party tracking pixels, and so on. CatchPoint has the ability of detecting bottlenecks. The metric itself is called bottleneck, and this basically helps you understand if there is a particular request which is slow and if it's blocking other requests from loading. What are those other signals that you can look for? Signals such as users' ability to interact with the page, whether it is document complete, time to interactive, or metrics such as speed index or visually complete, which tells you if the speed index and visually complete metrics were delayed or slowed down because of a bottleneck.
All right, great. Okay, let's see, we just got a great question, and this is a great way to prepare for high traffic days like Black Friday for the retail industry. How can banks better prepare for the traffic or volumes that they face at the same time? This could be people withdrawing at an ATM or making online payments.
Fantastic question. To be honest, that's probably one of the most interesting questions that I've never heard of in a Black Friday, but a very valid one. All right, interesting, right? So here's the way banks work, right? So there's a lot of APIs at play, and you want to ensure that you're monitoring these APIs at play, right? You want to monitor these. You want to ensure that these are behind a CDN or at least on network optimizers. So if it's going back to your origin or your multiple data centers across the globe, there is no latency on the network that is impacting these back and forth requests. And most importantly, ensure you've tested it enough, stress tested, load tested well before the event. And also you want to ensure that you are monitoring this. So you have these patterns and you know what's the behavior, right? So you always want to have historical data so you can go back and look at one, it's the application, or if it's more to do with an example. I know you mentioned about banks, but an interesting example that comes to my mind is a pretty popular payment gateway application, which was integrated with a pretty popular online travel portal here in Asia. And every time the users were choosing to check out with this platform, they were experiencing timeouts or they were failing. And so this travel portal were not able to detect where the problem was because they did not think that they had to monitor that payment option as well. And they were complaining to the provider, but they again were not able to detect it, but they were relying on real user monitoring and so on. You really need the visibility from those end users' point of view. But what will really help if you're preparing and you have the visibility to historical data and trends, so you could predict what could go wrong if the traffic and volume spikes. And APIs play, monitoring your APIs is a very important part of this whole exercise.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question here, then we'll close it out. Let's see, a vendor outage is costlier during holiday shopping, so do SLAs reflect that?
Well, it depends on the language that you have, right? If you go back and read the language of the SLA of any vendor, it could be, for example, a CDN. It's typically what you are spending, and it's a percentage of that, right? It's typically a percentage of your spend with your vendor. But the question is so apt, right? Which is, if there is an outage for an e-commerce for an hour on a Black Friday, we're probably talking a few $100,000 or even millions for that matter for large e-commerce, and that might really not go in line with your SLAs, right? So SLAs are great, but are not the solution for a downtime. The solution for a downtime is to ensure that we are well prepared, so you have failover options. Like I said, for Black Friday, it's good to have failover, like whether it is a multi-CDN, and you have a solution in place which automatically does the job of the failover and so on, right? So SLAs are good to track, so you can always hold your vendors accountable, but it's not probably the answer to the impact to the business, right? Because I don't think they would ever be able to match the impact to the business.
Okay, all right, great. Maybe we can squeeze one more question in since we just got it in, and then we're definitely got to close it out. So the question is, can this platform be integrated with cloud app services?
Absolutely. Yeah. So this can be integrated. CatchPoint has a deep integration with a lot of solutions across. We have enterprises that. So I just want to ensure that I've understood your question right. So when you say cloud applications, you have applications hosted in the cloud, and you want to know if CatchPoint can be used for monitoring the cloud app services. Correct me if I'm wrong, but based on that understanding, the answer is yes. As long as you have end users accessing your application from different locations, that's even more important for you to monitor, because the control that you have over your application that is in the cloud is very limited, right? So you really want to be able to, for example, the Google Cloud outage that happened on June 24th, I guess, right, or June 2nd. When the Google Cloud outage happened, a lot of companies were sitting ducks, basically waiting for them to resolve the problem. So you really need the visibility. Again, the failover and other concepts come in play, but it's even more important that you monitor, because you've lost a lot of control when your applications are on the cloud, but your end users are not on the cloud, right? Your end users are coming from different cities, using their mobile phones, broadband connections, sitting from Starbucks or cafes and so on. You really want to ensure that you're monitoring your end users.
Okay, all right, great. Well, we're about 2 minutes to the top of the hour, so we do have to close out the question and answer period. Before we do close out the webinar, though, Peter, I know you have a couple closing remarks that you want to make.
Yes, I will be very brief. I know some folks are probably hanging on the line for the gift card, so I'll cruise right through this. So, just to reiterate, for who CatchPoint is, I know Nith had been using a lot of our charts and graphs and some of our practices throughout the webinar. But what CatchPoint is, we're a digital experience monitoring platform that pinpoints performance and availability problems that users experience anywhere in the world. Essentially, we help the world's internet builders and operators detect and fix issues with confidence faster than they ever have been before. So that's what CatchPoint does. If anybody wants to see a demo or start it, we do 14-day free trials. Just go to catchpoint.com. There's a big green button at the top that says start a trial, but also if you go into our learn section, go down to demos, it's a great way to get introduced with the CatchPoint tool itself, if this has piqued your interest. And then my closing remark was just to thank Nith, and it was a fantastic presentation, and there was and I thank you, the audience, wonderful questions that Nith was able to answer beautifully, and thank you, Charlene, and the rest of the DevOps.com team for promoting and seamlessly organizing a great webinar. Thank you guys so much.
Well, thank you. Thank you. As you mentioned, we are still on tap to do the Amazon gift card drawing. So let's go ahead and do that real quick before we hit the golden hour. Our winners for the $350 Amazon gift card winner. Let's see. First one is Annuity Espinal, and I apologize if I mispronounce your name. Second is Matt Collins. Congratulations to both of you. And our final winner today is Tony Dan. So congratulations, Tony. Want to remind the audience real quick that today's event has been recorded. So if you missed any or all of it, you will be able to access it again on demand. We are going to be sending out an email that contains a link so that you can get to that webinar. The webinar is also going to be living on the devops.com website, so you can always find it there. Just go to www.devops.com/webinars in the on-demand section, and it should be right there waiting for you. Again, thank you to everybody who joined me today. And this is Charlene O'Hanlon, and I'm signing off. Have a great day, everybody.